Hi everyone, this is Carrie Cole with Side by Side Educational Consulting, where we specialize working side by side with educators to improve outcomes for all kids. So we've been in a video series around explicit systematic phonics instruction, and today I want to talk about multisensory instruction as connected to explicit phonics instruction. When you add that multisensory piece, it just makes the instruction even more explicit. So what does it mean to have multisensory instruction, particularly when we're talking about phonics? We want to be really careful about this, especially when we're thinking about that science of reading and what multisensory instruction really means. So when we talk about multisensory, I want us to think about four components: visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic. So we have visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic. We think about those four elements and how we can embed that into our explicit instruction, that idea of I do, we do, you do. So I'm going to model those things for kids with those connections, those four connections to those multisensory components, and then have kids practice it together and then have them practice it on their own. So let's break down each one of those, starting with the visual. So when we think about a visual representation, I think that's usually pretty self-explanatory for us. We're used to a visual representation of a letter, for example, because we have the print, the letter D, that's going to represent that sound, D. But I want us to also think about a connection that could be visual, that would show kids actually what it looks like to articulate that sound. So I have an example for you right here. If we were thinking about the sound S, so not only might we represent that with S, that could be one visual connection, but another visual connection could be this idea that we're showing kids what it looks like, the visual of what it looks like to articulate that sound in the mouth. So we would talk to kids about how that looks when we're articulating that sound. They could have a picture in front of them that's visual. Another thing that you could do to just enhance that a little bit more is to have kids each have individual mirrors, and they have those in front of them while they're articulating that new sound, thinking about that sound, and then they themselves can see making that sound in the mirror and get a visual connection that way. So that's visual. When you think about auditory, that's obviously going to be pretty self-explanatory as well, because that's going to be, what do you hear? And that's something that we're always connecting to anyway. What do you hear when you make that sound? How does that sound when you make that sound? So that auditory connection is often already a part of phonics instruction. It's something that we're used to. Let's think about kinesthetic. So kinesthetic has to do with movement. When you think about movement in connection to phonics, it's not going to be just any movement. We could be moving our hands, and that's a kinesthetic movement. But the question is, how is moving my hands or moving my arms connecting to the phoneme or the grapheme association? It's not. We're going to really be thinking about how we use that kinesthetic connection in relation to that phoneme and grapheme. So when we think about kinesthetic, the movement that's involved, I'll come back to that sound S. We're going to talk about what's moving in your mouth to make that sound. That's the type of kinesthetic connection we want to make with kids. So what do you feel? What are you moving in your mouth to make that sound? Talking about that. Looking in the mirror again, making that visual connection. So there's a visual and kinesthetic connection going on. The tactile would be, what do you feel? So not only what's moving, but how does it feel when you move those parts of your mouth? So again, coming back to S, what do you feel? Well, I feel that there is air being pushed through my teeth. So I am pushing, that's the kinesthetic, air through my teeth, and I can feel that air being pushed through my teeth. S, it's skinny air being pushed through my teeth. That is the tactile, connecting to how it feels. So lots of times when you're introducing those phoneme-grapheme associations in explicit instruction and systematic instruction, again, you want to think about, what does it look like? How does it sound? What does it feel like, the tactile? And what movement are we making in order to make that sound? The more access points we can provide kids in learning those phoneme-grapheme associations, the more kids will be able to master those concepts because we're able to provide it in a more explicit manner. We want to be able to model all of that for kids. So one other thing I want you to think about in terms of a kinesthetic connection is handwriting. Oftentimes we miss that connection. We teach handwriting, but we're not even connecting it to that explicit systematic phonics. Handwriting is a gross motor movement. This is a great opportunity for you to connect to that kinesthetic movement and give kids another opportunity to connect to not only that letter name when they make that movement, when they're writing that letter, but what that sound is when they write that letter. That is another access point for them that will help them to master that concept. So again, the 4 access points are the visual, the auditory, the tactile, and the kinesthetic. And one way that we can really remind ourselves to think about that in explicit instruction is to think about these questions and pose these questions to kids. What does it look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like?